All right, so we're just going to give people a few minutes to, or a few seconds just to I can see numbers, people just registering, and people may come in a little bit late. Okay, so let's give it, well, let's get started and people can come in. So welcome to Brain Injury Canada's first webinar for Brain Injury Associations. My name is Michelle McDonald and I am the Executive Director of Brain Injury Canada. We're really excited about our new educational webinar initiative, which not only helps us learn and add some new skills to our work, but also helps Brain Injury Canada build stronger relationships with the community and provincial associations. So before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. All attendees have been muted, but we do want to hear from you. You can submit questions throughout your control panel. There's two options for doing it. There's the questions, which you can open and submit a question, and then there's the chat feature as well. So questions will be held into the end of the presentation, and we will endeavor to answer some of them. If they're ones that I can answer throughout, I will try to do that, but otherwise we'll leave them for the presenter to answer at the end. The webinar is also being recorded, and all registered attendees will be sent a link. It will also be hosted on our website, and that link will be sent around at the end as well. But please feel free to circulate this to any of your board members that are unable to attend the live presentation, or any of your senior staff that may have an interest in how board governance works. We're also hoping to add on to this topic, add on to what this webinar. So if there's any topics or speakers that you're interested in hearing from, let us know. We want to hear from you. So please send those to info@braininjurycanada.ca. Okay, so, all right, let's get started. So I'm thrilled to introduce Sophia Oldford. So to give a bit of a background, I took a course last fall at Algonquin College here in Ottawa, and Sophia was my professor. I was blown away by her knowledge and expertise in the nonprofit sector, so when it came time to find a speaker to talk about board governance for nonprofits, it was a pretty easy decision. So let me tell you a bit more about Sophia. She is a nonprofit management executive specializing in governance and organization development. Her career spans 3 decades in a wide variety of organizations, from one-person offices to Volunteer Canada and the Ontario Trillium Foundation. Her commitment to the sector includes volunteering for several boards of directors. Currently, Sophia is also teaching governance, communications, and strategic planning and leadership courses for Algonquin College's nonprofit sector management program. So enough of listening to me. Let's get to the good stuff. I'm going to pass the mic over to Sophia.
Thank you very much, Michelle. This is great, and I really appreciate being given this opportunity. And having Michelle as my student was terrific, and I've since heard about some of the great things that she's done with the board that she works with at Brain Injuries Canada, and I'm so pleased, very, very pleased. So welcome. This is about Governance 101. This is a primer for directors. So we're going to be talking about things at very basic level. I will go into some suggestions, some possible homework if you'd like to do that. You can take the college professor out of the classroom, but you can't really take the college professor out of the classroom. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. We do have some time at the end, I believe. So let's get started. So my agenda for this is going to be, first of all, we're going to some assumptions for this webinar. So I'm going to talk to you about some things that we are all going to agree with. The legal definitions, some implications for you as board members, your fiduciary duties. Yeah, I'll give you some takeaways, and then we'll go into questions. The assumptions that we're talking about is, first of all, this information is applicable to any nonprofit or charitable organization in Canada. They all are required to maintain certain to live up to certain legislation and maintain certain records, behave in certain ways. So this is very, very transferable to other things that you may also be doing. The second thing is charitable status is granted and governed by the Canada Revenue Agency. So I believe that you are all charitable organizations. So you all have the CRA to answer to. And some legislation is province specific. So if you are registered, say in BC, you would be responding to the BC Societies Act, and that's where the legislation that governs nonprofits in BC is. In Saskatchewan, for instance, is the Nonprofit Corporations Act. In Alberta, it's the Alberta Societies Act, etc. So one of the things to find out about is, are you federally or provincially incorporated? And that will tell you whether or not you deal with Industry Canada or if you deal with an agency in your own province. The legal definition of a nonprofit organization, this is a definition from the Quebec government, but it's standard law. A nonprofit is actually considered a legal person. It's a legal entity in and of itself, and it has its own specific rights and obligations. So it's less of a group of people as it is a specific entity. Now, that entity is made up, of course, of individual human beings. What makes them special is that they don't intend to make any money out of their involvement. That's what makes it a nonprofit. And a nonprofit must engage in specific activities and may not engage in others. So the easy way to look at it is that if you are dealing with something that's altruistic, that's a moral imperative, cultural, social, philanthropic, national, patriotic, religious, so on and so on and so on, but not primarily to make money, it is a nonprofit. Many people would argue that small businesses are nonprofits, but they're actually not, because their aim is to make money. If you'll notice down at the bottom, I have here, I'll put in some definitions. So pecuniary, it's relating to money, essentially. Now, the legal definition of a charity is that, first of all, it has to provide a tangible benefit to the public, to those people who are eligible for benefits from the organization, or either the public as a whole, or a significant section of it, and that they're not a restricted group or one where members share a private connection. So a professional association with a specific membership, such as doctors. The doctors cannot have a charity. However, doctors could have a foundation that is open to other people, that raises money. Working for brain injury associations, you definitely fit into an organization that provides a tangible benefit to a significant section of people, but it's not restricted. You are open to survivors, to their friends, to their caregivers, health professionals that deal with survivors, etc. The final part is that the activities of the organization must be legal and comply with public policy. So if public policy stated that, sorry, my mind just blanked, but as Michelle knows, I like to give examples of things, so I'm sure public policy will come bouncing into my head any minute now. So what does this mean for you as a director? So the first thing is that you are the steward of an independent organization. You are the keeper of the organization. You are not, as an individual, you do not have a stake as an individual, but you do have a stake as a member of this group. Your organization, like all nonprofits, is governed by specific legislation. So what that means is we can't make things up. You're also bound morally and legally to act in the best interests of your organization. So that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So the question is, how can you do a good job? Because really, we all want to do a good job, right? And the answer is understand your fiduciary duties. So fiduciary is someone in whom somebody else has placed their trust. In our case here with brain injury associations, it's people that are living with brain injury or people that are supporting people with brain injuries. They have placed their trust in our organizations to do the best things for us as a group. So the relationship where one person has an obligation to act for another person's benefit really sums this whole thing up very well. It's our fiduciary duty to do our best for other people and for a specific group of other people. So what are your fiduciary duties? There's three of them. There's the duty of obedience, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of care. And we're going to start off with the duty of obedience. The first one is that you need to make sure that the nonprofit obeys applicable laws and acts in accordance with ethical practices. That's very important. So what does that mean? The second one, we're going to talk about those a bit in a bit. Second one is ensure that the nonprofit adheres to its stated corporate purposes and that its activities advance its mission. That one is a little trickier. So what exactly are the stated corporate purposes? They are listed in your articles of incorporation. When you incorporated as an organization, you had to tell, whether it was Industry Canada or Alberta Societies or whomever it was, you had to tell them what your purpose of being was. And they used to be called letters patent. Now they're called articles of incorporation. First question for your homework is, do you know where they're kept? And do you know what they say? Frequently, letters patent or articles of incorporation just sit somewhere in a file cabinet. Nobody pulls them out until it's time to ask for a grant somewhere and somebody wants to know. So, send us a copy of your articles of incorporation. So you need to know what they actually say, and then you need to look at them and see, are they accurately reflected in your mission statement? When Michelle was in my class, we went through strategic planning and we talked a lot about mission, vision, and values. And I was thrilled to hear that Michelle and her board went through the process of looking at Brain Injury Canada's mission and vision and values. And this is what they came up with. And I think that this is brilliant. The mission of Brain Injury Canada is to enhance the quality of life of individuals and families and caregivers living with brain injury in Canada. It's short, it's succinct, and it says exactly what the mission is. And those words should be reflected in the letters patent or in the articles of incorporation, that those activities should be reflected. The vision is great, that all individuals and families and caregivers living with the effects of brain injury are supported, valued, and engaged in their communities. When you start to break down those key words, all individuals, they're supported, they're valued, they're engaged, it really tells you what this organization wants to achieve. And the third statement, the values, is, again, these are the things that Brain Injury Canada feels are important. And to be able to spell that out so clearly really helps to guide the board of directors when they're making decisions, and helps the staff to understand what's important, what are priorities, and it helps to avoid something that's called mission creep. Mission creep is when frequently we hear of, say, a grant that's coming down that could be sort of tied in with what we do. We go after it because it's another way to get some more money in, and eventually we start creeping away from what our primary goal is. When you look at this statement of mission, vision, and values, you can tell exactly it's to enhance the quality of life of individuals and family caregivers. So if there was a major grant that was coming that was to, for instance, help to resettle immigrants, and there may be a component in there where some of those people may have brain injuries, so you go after that part of the grant because some of them may be helped, but at the same time you're going to get a fair bit of money that will help you do other things. That's called mission creep. It doesn't mean that the people that you're hoping to help don't have that, but it starts to stray away from your primary purpose. So that said, here's another piece of homework. Do you know what your mission, vision, and value statements say? Do you have mission, vision, and value statements, and do you know where they are? And when was the last time they were reviewed? Frequently, organizations will have a mission statement. Less common will be a vision statement, and even more rare is a vision statement. Or a value statement. I really strongly recommend that you go through the process of developing a mission, vision, and values. And Michelle has gone through this, as I said, with her board, and I'm sure she'd be happy to give you some ideas of how you could go about doing it yourself. These things should be reviewed, and here's an idea. Print a copy of these things and hang them on your boardroom wall. If your boardroom wall is not a dedicated room, Have them on a little card that, little tent card that sits up in front of you each time you have a board meeting. Have it printed and put on the front page of your board binder if you have such a thing. Have it printed on the bottom of all of your letterhead. Have the mission ingrained so that you can spout it off the minute somebody says, oh, tell me what the Brain Association of Hope does, and you can tell them. So here's the third part of the duty of obedience. Ensure that the organization complies with all applicable federal, provincial, and local laws and regulations. So federal would be the CRA, provincial might be whomever you incorporated with, and local laws, of course, building codes and such, and regulations. But there's another kind of local law and regulation I'd like to talk about. And that is your own, association's own laws and legislation, and specifically your bylaws and constitution. Those are your laws and legislation. Now, again, here's yet another piece of homework, and I promise you're not going to get this every third slide, but this is important in the beginning. Your homework is to get a paper copy of your bylaws and constitution and read it. Mark it up. Highlight anything you find important, underline things that you'd like to talk about at the next board meeting, circle anything you don't understand. You need to understand your bylaws and constitution because those are the laws and regulations that you as a board member have to follow. And if you don't know what they say, then it's tough to follow them. So you'll have to excuse me, my laptop decides that it keeps wanting to recharge itself. So reporting to Industry Canada, that's one of the first things. If it is Industry Canada you report to, this is the list. If it's not Industry Canada, if it's British Columbia corporations or whomever it might be, they have very, very similar rules. First of all, you have to file an annual return every year. And that annual return will talk about everything from the minutes that you have, the motions that you have made. It may be any changes to your bylaws. It may be, usually it's your annual report, but it's also a number of other pieces of information that that the government would want to know. How many people did you serve, etc. If you've changed your office address, you have to file that. Any changes regarding your directors, you have to file. And I'm going to talk specifically about the timing of those later on, but it's really important because frequently directors on boards will, they'll come or they'll go. And if you don't continually file and keep the government up to date on this, it's very tricky, especially if something should happen down the road. They want to know who is actually sitting at the table when whatever it was happened. You need to file your financial statements and your public accountant's report. Depending on how much income you receive each year will depend on what kind of a financial review you have to have. And it may change depending on the province you're in. But generally there are three kinds. One is an external review, a financial audit that is done by a chartered accountant. The second is a financial review, also done by an external financial accountant. And the third is a financial review that's done by an internal body. So it may be that your treasurer knows. Generally, you can only get away with an internal review if you don't have a high number of a high revenue coming in. But again, if you look at the rules regarding nonprofits and nonprofits in your area, you will get an idea. If you have charitable status, the CRA definitely will tell you whether or not you have to have a full financial review or a financial audit. You have to keep your articles up to date. So if you make a change about how many members need to sit, are required to sit on your board, you must inform your governing body. And you have to send copies of your bylaws. So if you review your bylaws and if you revise them, which is recommended, you have to let the government know what you're doing. This is especially important if you if you have charitable status. So when you amend your articles, you must, if you make any changes to the following, you must let them know. The corporation's name, So if you change your name, you can't just change the name. It's not that easy. You actually have to let the let Corporate Industry Canada or whoever your governing body know that you've changed your name, and it's not easy to do this. So think long and hard before you do it. A lot of organizations are moving away from, let's say, the Brain Injuries Association of Kamloops, and it just becomes Brain Injuries Kamloops or Brain Injury Kamloops. They're dropping those extra words, and that's become a very common thing to do, but you can't just sort of do it. You actually have to go through the process of reporting to Industry Canada on it. If you decide to change the province or territory where your registered office is located, you'd have to let them know, and I don't believe that's the issue for anybody here, other than maybe Brain Injury Canada. If you change the number of directors you have to let them know. If you change the classes of your members, so if you have paid members and non-paid members and honorary members, you have to let them know. If there's any restrictions on the activities that you've changed, you have to let them know that you're changing these things. Your statement of purpose, and what this is if you decide to change your mission statement and it fundamentally changes your statement of purpose, you must let the government know. If you decide that when you first incorporated, you decided that if you should dissolve, anything that you have left was going to go to the Brain Injury Association down the road, and they're no longer there. So now you've decided, no, you're going to just change your article so it says it will go to another Brain Injury Association in your province. You need to let them know this. And any other provision that you've changed in your articles. So this could be something as simple as if you've decided that quorum is no longer 50% plus one, but now quorum must be 60%, you need to let them know this. It all sounds a bit onerous, but it's a way to help nonprofit boards think before lots of changes are made, and to help them from maybe straying off the path of what's considered appropriate when they don't know that that's off the path. So I'm going to make a quick note about the Secretary of the Board. Frequently, the Secretary of the Board is the person that puts up their hand and says, well, okay, I've got a computer and I've got some time, so I'll take the minutes. And everybody goes, that's great, thank you. And they take the minutes. But the Secretary of the Board is so much more than that. In fact, minute taking can be delegated to anybody. That's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose of the Secretary is to make sure that all of the annual returns are made, both federal and provincial. The Secretary is required to keep a record of the board minutes and a record of the board decisions, so the motions or agreements that have been made, that have been recorded in the minutes, and the annual reports filed with government agencies. All of those decision-making documents. Formal communications, the board to the staff, the board to the membership, the board to funders, etc. That is the responsibility of the Secretary. Now, it could go out under the chairperson's name, and it could be written by somebody else, but it's the responsibility of the Secretary to make sure that those things are sent out. And it's also the responsibility of the Secretary to ensure that an annual report is written and available on time. I wanted to bring up a quick point, and this is one that, these are 2 points that people often overlook or didn't know about. The minutes of board meetings, after they have been approved at the next meeting, must be signed by the chair and the vice chair. Sometimes they can be signed by the chair and the secretary, although that's not the best, because if the secretary also took the minutes, that could be seen as a conflict of interest. So often it's the chair and the vice chair, and you don't sign these minutes until after they've been approved. So when you get the minutes, you take the minutes at the meeting in March, they get typed out, they get distributed, you look at them again in April. Do we have approval for these minutes? Yes. At that point, they become the minutes. Up until that, they're just the draft. But once they become the minutes, then they are signed by the chair and the vice chair and kept in a safe location. And minutes and annual reports must be kept in perpetuity. That means even if your organization dissolves, somebody is charged with keeping these things in a box in their garage. You are not supposed to destroy minutes or annual reports, ever. I don't know what this means for organizations that have been around for a very long time. I guess that's where all the storage units are being built. But you can't just say, okay, well, that was 4 years ago or 7 years ago or 10 years ago, we're going to throw them out. You can't do that. You have to keep them at least as long as the organization is operating. And after that, the best thing is to check with whoever you were incorporated with to see, what should be done with these things now. Usually, I believe they'll just tell you, okay, now you can chuck them, but you can't do that until you've gotten permission. So for those of you that have been checking out your board minutes, it's time to start calling up old members and see if somebody has squirreled theirs away from years past. The fourth point of duty of obedience is that you have to maintain oversight of the nonprofit's finances. So this is evaluating the financial policies, and you should have financial policies. There should be a policy book with a section that says financial policies. Approving annual budgets, and you should have an annual budget, and it should be approved and ready to go before your fiscal year begins. So if your fiscal year begins on January 1st, you really need to start talking about developing your annual budget for the coming year sometime around October. Finally, review periodic financial reports. This may be monthly, this may be quarterly, but you have to know what the period is between financial reports, and they should be on time and up to date when they come through. Here's a question for you. Do you understand your association's financial processes? Do you know how your association works in terms of money? How often do you review your budget? Is it a once-a-year thing, or do you actually look at it at every meeting to see how well are you doing budget to actual? Do you look at the statement of financial position? It's sometimes referred to as the balance sheet, but because we don't have revenue and income in the same way as for-profit, it's called the statement of financial position, sometimes called the statement of change of financial position, but that's a really big mouthful. Do you look at the income statement? And do you look at the budget to actual expenditures? Lots of time, people will look at budget to actual expenditures and they'll say, oh, okay, well, we budgeted $5,000 for this and we've only spent $3,000, so we're fine. Yes, but it's only February. And so you've already spent $3,000 of $5,000 you meant to spend out over the whole year. It could be that that's totally understandable because you do a major thing in January and February and you usually spend that. So when you're building your budget, a good thing to do is to break it down by month. How much of this particular amount of money are we going to spend in this month? And then when you're getting your budget back and you say, well, we spent 40% of it, and yes, we should have spent 40% by now, or no, we should have spent 80% by now, or no, we should have only spent 20% by now, you can start to ask questions that are actually valid. And it really helps for your staff to be able to have questions posed like this, because then they don't have to, well, it's because in June we always pay our auditor, and so this is always why we have a balloon payment at this time. The most important question I have for you is, do you provide financial training to your new board members? Frequently, and all too frequently, I hear stories about people that have been on boards for a long time, but they've never really understood the financials. And that's one of those decisions that they just kind of nodded. They raised their hand when when the chair said, all in favor, yeah, okay, fine. But they don't really understand. And this is a real problem because as board members, you are legally liable for the finances of the organization. If you are acting in good faith, and if you have done the proper things like reviewing your budget, you know what the processes are, you understand your policies, then you're protected. But if you really don't know what's going on and you're sort of blindly following along, then you put yourself at really great risk, and that's never a good idea. So are you providing financial training to your new board members? Is there somebody there to tell them how your association's finances work? Would your auditor be willing to come in and give a training session for you? Frequently, if you've had the same auditor for a while and they've developed a relationship with your organization, they're happy to do that for you. Or is there a chartered accountant that could do that for you? Or is there another organization that you'd like to do that for you? So for instance, Brain Injury Canada might be willing to put on a broad financial training webinar. However, you'd still have to find somebody that could help to explain your exact situation, because everybody has slightly different things. And if you can't explain it yourself, then it's really good to have somebody else in who can. So the fifth point of duty of obedience is ensure that the organization has necessary resources to carry out its mission. It's up to you to make sure that you can meet that mission statement. And necessary resources means enough money and enough staff. So here's another point that has come up often. Directors who, some are very good about fundraising, and others that say, you know, that's really not my thing, that's not why I joined up. Once you've joined an organization in the position of leadership, you really have an obligation to participate in fundraising. Now, that might be anything from writing grants, or seeking sponsorships, or making connections with people you know in your real life. Or it could be that it's actually getting out there and you are selling raffle tickets, or you're working the gala or the bingo or whatever it might be. In some cases, on some boards of some organizations, directors have an obligation to raise a specific amount of money independently. Now, these tend to be the bigger organizations that where to be on the board is, to get onto the board is quite difficult, and it's quite a prestigious thing. But even with small organizations, it's very difficult for, say, the staff to get enthusiastic about fundraising if the directors don't show commitment as well. So even if you're making a token contribution of $5 a month to your organization, that still goes a long way to showing other people on the board, other people within the staff, and other people in the organization that you really do believe in this, and that you're willing to pony up. So that's something to think about. The other part of necessary resources is that directors have an obligation to ensure that there are enough qualified employees doing the amount of work that's being asked of them, that they're working an appropriate number of hours, and that they're given appropriate guidance. And clearly that they're being compensated appropriately. The big thing about nonprofit is that most of the people that work in nonprofits do it because they feel a calling to it. They agree with the cause, or they really want to contribute more than they might be able to do in the private sector. And if they do so frequently, there's a big blur between work and life. And knowing that the organization, is tight with the budget, doesn't have as much money to spend as they'd like to, staff will frequently work longer hours than necessary, maybe more days than necessary. And the pro of that is that you get all this semi-free work done, but the con of that is that you will lose staff to burn out faster. So it's not really in your best interest to have to deal with that. Onboarding new staff is incredibly costly. And if you're a small organization with very few staff, or maybe even a one-person shop, and you lose somebody who has all the corporate history and knows how things are done, who does the audit, who delivers the water, and who books the room for the monthly meetings. If you lose that person, it's very expensive to bring somebody else on and train them up. So that word shepherd comes in again, and it's to be careful of your resources and to make sure that your resources are being used appropriately. And so with staff, that means that they're given enough, they're working the appropriate number of hours, and if not, that you bring in other staff if possible, or other volunteers, that you compensate your staff so you don't lose them to somebody else, and that they're given appropriate guidance. Now, this is really important, the appropriate guidance. People really like it when they know what's expected of them, and they know what the end game is, what the outcome is, what the goal is. And if staff don't know what the goals and objectives are of the organization, one of two things will happen. Either they'll become disillusioned and they just make busy work, or they will put their time and effort into something they believe is what the right thing to do, but may not necessarily be what the board is asking for. So it's important that they be given appropriate guidance, that they know what the goals and objectives are for the year and for next couple of years, so that they can work appropriately towards that. The sixth point is that the board of directors must, and directors specifically, must remain accountable to its donors and the general public. So let's break that one down. What does it mean? So being accountable to your donors is relatively straightforward. You need to report on time and in full for grants and sponsorships. So if you receive money from, I believe in Alberta it's called the Wild Rose Foundation, you receive money from the Wild Rose Foundation, you have to report on what you've done with the money, how you've used it, etc., according to their reporting guidelines. You have to do that on time, and you have to do it completely and do a good job of it. You also have to fulfill conditions of the grant or sponsorship. If you've noticed at the beginning of this webinar, this webinar has been sponsored by 2 different companies, and their names are right up front, so you know who they are. And that was probably a condition of the sponsorship, was that they be recognized for their contribution, which is entirely appropriate. So if that's what's in the grant or the sponsorship, you must respect that and fulfill those conditions. If it's the conditions refer to the program delivery, so X number of meetings, of support meetings with X number of people at each meeting, if that's what the conditions are, you have to be able to record those things so that you can tell the grantor, yes, in fact, we met that, or no, we didn't, and this is why not, or we exceeded our expectations. That's always a good one, because then you can say, please, can you give us some more money? That's always nice. So that's what being accountable to your donors means. Now, what does it mean to be accountable to the general public? There's a couple of different ways. The general public is represented by the government. And so if you have to report annually, you do have to report annually to Industry Canada if you are federally incorporated, or it would be your provincial body. Generally, they ask for the date of the corporation's last annual meeting, and that has to happen annually. They need to know changes on the board of directors. This is one thing that, like I said, frequently gets overlooked. If a new director is elected or appointed, Industry Canada needs to know. If a director has resigned or is removed, Industry Canada needs to know. And if a director moves, Industry Canada needs to know the change of their personal address. When new directors are appointed or directors are removed or resign, you have to let them know within 15 days. If somebody says to you, oh, I'm going to be moving next month, you have to let Industry Canada know within 15 days of that conversation taking place, not necessarily when they actually move. So you need to be on top of this kind of thing. And that's one of the reasons why the secretary is so much more than a minute taker. The secretary is responsible for making sure all these things happen. The secretary may not do it him or herself and may delegate it to a staff person, but they are still responsible for making sure it happens. Annually, you have to report to the Canada Revenue Agency if you have charitable status. So if that's the case, then there are several things, and I've listed them there. You receive a package every year. It has these nice little barcodes. Don't throw those out. You need them. Your accountant will need them. But there are several forms to fill out. Usually, the person that does your audit will fill them out for you and then just ask you to fill in certain areas, but not always. The important thing to know is that a charity that doesn't file its return on time can lose its registered status. Now, the $500 penalty can be painful, but it's not nearly as painful as losing the ability to give tax receipts to donors. Because if you can't give a tax receipt, people are not likely to donate to you. And if they don't donate to you, then your external fundraising activities are that much more important. And it's not being able to give out, not being able to have a charitable number really limits you. So this is something that you really must pay attention to. You must file your return on time. And what else does it mean to be accountable to the general public? Well, it means being transparent about how you spend your money. So in your newsletter, if you received a grant and you spent 75% of the grant on programming, then you need to let people know. Well, we spent 75% of this grant on programming, but you also need to let them know, and we spent 15% on supplies, and we spent 10% on administration. So it's important to let people know how much you're doing. The more transparent you are, the more trustworthy people will see you as. When you have your annual financial review and that comes back, make sure that when it's distributed or it's made available to the public, that specific information is there. Don't have everything broken down into so few categories. One that says administration, one that says programs, one that says services, and one that says other. That's not enough. That's not transparent enough. Now, at the same time, you don't want to have people's individual salaries out there. You may not want to let people know exactly the dollar figure of what you pay for insurance or rent or whatever. Puts you in a bad position if you want to negotiate that again later. But making sure that you've got things broken down enough that people can actually understand what you're doing is important. And down below, I've just mentioned that you have to send the required financial information, such as annual report, to your members not less than 21 days, but not more than 60 days before the day on which the annual meeting of members is held. So get a calendar and work that one backwards. Another way of being accountable is by holding an annual general meeting. This is really important. You must do this every year. And according to industry, if you are registered with Industry Canada, you must hold an AGM no later than 6 months afterwards, and there must be no more than 15 months between general meetings. Now, the exception is if your bylaws state that you will hold your AGM 90 days after your fiscal year end rather than 6 months, then this overrides the 6-month rule. You must adhere to your bylaws, not to what Industry Canada is saying. Duty of loyalty. So 3 points here. First one, make decisions in the best interest of the nonprofit organization, not in your own self-interest. So one of the biggest ways that you can do this is you can agree to disagree, but you must do it with respect. Your ego should not be involved here. You may be very passionate about the cause, and you may feel that you know exactly the right way to deal with things, but you must respect that other people around the table probably feel the same way you do. So you must disagree when necessary or debate when necessary with respect and with dignity. And once a decision has been made and you leave the boardroom, you are no longer, that decision doesn't belong to you or to somebody else. It belongs to the board as a whole. So telling people outside the boardroom how you disagreed, what you said, what somebody else said is not appropriate, nor is it ethical. If you don't agree with the decision, don't try to undermine it by lack of participation or cooperation. Once a decision being made, adopt it and embrace it and move forward. Don't ask to reconsider decisions, except unless you have new information that would drastically change the outcome, or if having implemented the decision and you've lived with it for 6 months or an appropriate length of time, it's tangibly hurting you. So for instance, you've decided to shift the way that you do a certain program, and because of that shift, you're now losing money and losing participants. And after 6 months, you're still losing money and participants. Then you can ask to revisit it. But constantly going back and asking to revisit decisions that have recently been made is not productive, and it's not helpful. So a quick word about decision making. Boards of directors often feel, directors on boards often feel that their decision making belongs to them and them alone. And it doesn't. You share your decision making with others. There's 3 kinds of decisions your board can make. You can make them independently. You can make decisions that have to be approved by your membership, and you can make decisions that have to be agreed upon by external agencies. So the first one, independently. You can make financial decisions, such as setting the budget, borrowing money, loaning money, etc. You can develop your own goals and objectives. You should certainly take the input of other people, but the decision is ultimately yours and the responsibility is yours for that. Hiring the chief executive officer, who's also called the executive director or the CEO or association coordinator, the top ranking staff person, hiring that person, supervising them, giving annual performance reviews and possibly terminating them is the responsibility of the board, and the board makes that decision independently. Choosing a meeting place, meeting dates, places, and agendas are the responsibility and at the sole discretion of the board, but you can't use them to limit membership participation. So much as you may want to have your next board meeting in Hawaii, you can't do that because unless you make arrangements for any member that wishes to be involved in that meeting to also be there. Now that could be a Skype call, and if you're having a board meeting in Hawaii, I'd love to come and facilitate that for you. But otherwise, this is up to you to make those decisions. The next one are things that, decisions that have to be ratified by the membership. Okay, so the rule of thumb is any change that must be reported to the CRA or Industry Canada or your provincial governing body must go to the membership and must be approved by the membership. This includes anybody that's elected to the board. It doesn't include interim appointments to the board. So let's say somebody resigns and you say, well, we don't have an annual meeting for 6 months, but would you be interested in sitting on our board until then? That's an interim appointment. That doesn't need to go to the membership. If somebody resigns, that doesn't need to go to the membership. And if somebody is removed from the board according to your bylaws, that doesn't need to go to the membership. And of course, if a board member decides to move their private residence, that doesn't go to the board, to the membership. However, anything else that would be reported to the CRA or to Industry Canada or your provincial body must go to the board, or must go to the membership. So that's name changes, that's changes in the mission statement, that's dropping of a major program. Doesn't have to go to the membership, but should for goodwill purposes. Decisions that, things that would require fundamental changes that affect your core operations require a meeting of the members. So that's either an annual general meeting or a special general meeting. And again, your bylaws will tell you what kind of notice has to happen, what needs to happen in advance of that. Things that require 2/3 majority vote, name changes, membership categories. So again, if you decide to have paid members, non-paying members, and honorary members, then if you're going to change any of that, it has to go to your membership. Things that just require 50% plus one, election of boards, appointments of auditors, and by the way, you must have a membership vote to appoint your auditor. And again, the requirement for approval may be higher than a simple majority in your bylaws, but it can never be lower than what Industry Canada or the CRA require. Decisions that must be agreed upon with external agencies. So if you have a program or service that's funded externally, you have to speak to your funder before you can make any major changes. If you change any programs or services that fundamentally change the purpose of the organization. So if up until now you've been an advocacy only group and now you are going to become a service providing group, that has to go to external agencies depending on who it is that you are working with or are registered with. And finally, if you have staff that are unionized labor agreements, you have to speak to the union or the association that your staff is represented by. The second and third points of duty of loyalty, one is avoid potential conflicts of interest and be willing to speak out if one is perceived. Now, a conflict of interest is a conflict between the private interest and the official responsibilities of a person in a position of trust. Conflicts of interest are an interesting topic, and they probably would take up a little bit more time than we have here. If you do have specific questions, though, I would be happy to talk to you about what a conflict of interest actually is. So, duty of care. There we go. So, the first 3 or 4 points. The duty of care requires that you give the same care and concern to your board responsibilities as any prudent and ordinary person would do. So what that means is if you are an accountant, you have to look at the financials with an accountant's eye. But if you are a librarian, you are not expected to understand the financials to the same degree as the accountant. However, that doesn't mean that you're off the hook. It still means that you need to understand the financials to the same degree as any other prudent and ordinary person would. And that's actually a legal term. So that's important to keep in mind. If you are a healthcare provider, you are going to be looking at, let's say, a program with a slightly different eye than the accountant. And again, that doesn't let the accountant off the hook. They must understand too what's involved, but to not to the same degree as what the healthcare provider does. You have to take care of the nonprofit by ensuring prudent use, there's that word again, of all assets, including facility, people, and goodwill. So that means you don't do anything that you know is going to damage the reputation of your organization, that's going to harm your ability to raise money, that's going to cause an issue with, that's going to cause, you know, a great deal of uproar with the membership or with the community that supports you. And finally, provide oversight for all activities that advance the nonprofit. And I'm going to talk about oversight for a moment. How far does providing oversight go for a board member? My favorite phrase is nose in, fingers out. That means look, see what's going on, but don't get in there and do the job of somebody else. Specifically, don't do the job of your staff. You have the ability to set direction with these tools, your mission statement. So we talked about that before. The mission statement is rarely changed and only to update and improve, but there it is. The vision and value statement, you review them. Terms of reference. Terms of reference are really important. Do you have a comprehensive, up-to-date terms of reference? Have you read it? Again, like you did with your bylaws, read it and mark it up and bring it up, talk about it. Duty of care. Board members are expected to actively participate in organizational planning and decision-making and to make sound and informed judgments. This is my plug for taking a strategic planning course wherever you can find one, because that's what organizational planning is. Active participation is active. It means that you've prepared before you go to your board meetings. You've read your materials. You've written down the questions you want to ask. If you have more information, need more information, ask the chair. Don't go directly to the executive director, because what will be happening then is you have potentially, if you have, say, 8 members on your board, you have potentially 6 or 7 people that are calling in and saying, I don't understand this one particular thing. That's for the chair to manage and for the chair to get the information. Be prepared to give a considered and well-developed opinion. Sort of understand how you feel about something before you walk into the board meeting. And be prepared to change your mind. It could be that somebody has brought up something that you hadn't thought about, that there might be other information you need to know about. Be prepared to vote. One of the things that says, I abstain because I don't understand, that's really an abdication of your responsibility. And follow through. If you say you're going to do something, do it on time and to the best of your ability. That's really important to be a good board member. So here are my takeaways for this session. Stay on course with your organization's mission, vision, and values. And if you don't have all 3 of those statements, see what you can do about developing them. Keep your eye on the legalities. Understand what people like the CRA and Industry Canada or your provincial body need from you. Take your organization's health seriously. If you're not keeping a good eye on the money situation, who is? That's your job. If the staff is either underperforming or they're not happy or they're overworked, that's your responsibility to deal with. You need to give the executive director the resources they need to run a tight ship. Put your organization before yourself. When you're on the board, you are representing something bigger than your own belief. You need to put yourself in the shoes of the organization as a whole. Put your organization before others. So if you are a member of several different organizations, you really have to decide where your loyalties lie. And if they're all complementary, that's great. But if you find something that's competing, you need to really sort it out in your own head and figure out which one you're going to support and which one has to be set aside. And finally, behave in a morally ethical manner. If you know that it's wrong, don't do it. This is one of the things that they talk about when they say what a prudent person would do. If you're uneasy about doing something, then a prudent person would not do that. So that's what you need to do. So I'm sorry I'm wrapping this up really quickly, but I wanted to give you some time for questions. And so there we go. That was a lot of information in a very short time, but I'm hoping I gave enough of a direction within the PowerPoint itself. That there's lots of links there to other places, and I cited my sources. So if you want to find out more, there's lots of opportunity there. And over to you, Michelle.
So afterwards, but there were a few interesting questions. Most of them were around the minutes, and I encourage people to send any other questions. But one of the questions was, are digitized minutes acceptable?
They are if your terms of reference or if your bylaws allow for them to be. If they don't, if your bylaws don't, it's a fairly simple change to make. You can't put it into effect until the membership has voted on it. Usually there's no problem. You can have a special vote just on that one particular item. And again, that would be called the special general meeting. And if you are already using electronics to have your meetings, certainly that would be a really good question. Once you've said digitized is fine, that's great. You can go ahead and do that.
Okay, and the keeping of the minutes, this is another question in perpetuity. Was that for both the AGM or the annual general meeting and all board meetings?
Yes, yes, you have to do it for both.
Okay.
It's a lot of paper.
It is.
I strongly suggest a good scanner.
Yes. Okay, so this is an interesting question. I'm questioning, so this was going back to about the minutes again. I'm questioning the no signature from the secretary. There is no conflict as the secretary's signature establishes evidence of the original document's authenticity per Robert's rules. Can you speak to that?
Certainly, it comes along to the same reason why frequently people feel that the treasurer should not chair the finance committee. What it is if the secretary has written the minutes and then they go to the board, and let's say a change is made, and the secretary doesn't actually change that phrase or that word or the outcome of that vote, whatever it was, then it falls down to the only other person that signed it, which is the chair. And it's always better to have two what are considered objective eyes looking at it. So if the secretary was one that originally wrote them and then made the changes, then that removes one set of objective eyes.
Okay. Okay. All right. I think that clears it up for me. Sorry, just a continuation on that. Where is that from? Where would to back up that your response, where would someone find the regulations on that?
It's generally going to be in possibly your bylaws, but definitely it will be in, for instance, if you're federally regulated, it is in the new Canada Nonprofit Act. Ontario is the Ontario Nonprofit Act. British Columbia, I believe, has passed their new Nonprofit Act. Some provinces are slower to adopt the latest and greatest, but it will be definitely in your provincial body's corporation's agency. Okay. Whoever it was that registered your charity or your nonprofit.
Okay. Okay, let me just see if there's any other questions. We're actually right at the end. An hour is up. So It does look like we've run out of time. We are also doing this on Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern if you want to repeat performance or if you want to let your coworkers know. But I really would like to sincerely thank Sophia for sharing her expertise and knowledge. I think we all learned a lot of great info. I also want to thank our generous sponsors who made this initiative possible. Our gold sponsor, Bergeron Clifford Personal Injury Lawyers, and our silver sponsor, Zaire Insurance Brokers. We couldn't do it without their support. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of the attendees who tuned in for this. This is part of, as I mentioned before, building stronger relationships, more collaborative relationships with the provincial and community associations as one sort of common, not common voice, but a voice working together. I think we can help build bridges instead of the silos that exist. So I would like to thank everyone for attending, and thank you, Sophia, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.